deep knowledge of this proposed project and EPA's draft permit for it. My name is Steve Jan. I'm the chief of the Underground Injection Control Branch at EPA Region 5 in Chicago. Tim Elkins is an environmental scientist who works at my branch and is the person who reviewed this permit application and developed the draft permit that is out there for comment right now. Let me just let you know how we'd like this evening to go. We've got two sections to tonight. The one that we're going to start when Tim gets going is, we call it an open house, and really this is a time that we like to set up for conversation. Tim's got about a 15-minute presentation, and then we'll have an hour and a half, or hour and 15 for conversation, questions, answers, conversations. Then after that, I think starting at 7:30, we'll do kind of the hearing. And that is the time of the night when we want to take comments for the record. So if you have opinions and comments that you share with us in this next session, that's great. But please, if you want to make those for the record and make sure that we respond to those in writing, then offer them up again when the hearing starts at 7:30. So, and when the hearing starts, I'll say it then and I'll say it now, and we're probably not going to be, the conversation from us is going to stop, and we'll be doing the listening, and then we'll have a court reporter here who will write down what everybody says, and we will respond to that later in writing. Okay, so we like this time for kind of the information exchange and for answering questions and conversation back and forth. So with that, let me ask Tim to spend about 15 minutes giving some background information from EPA's perspective, and then we can open it up and have that conversation.
Great. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. So first, thank you all very much for your patience. I realize we had the first comment period starting back in December and ending in January. And so I know it's been some time. I know this is all very important, and I've heard some really great comments and concerns. So thank you for the patience, and thank you for having us out here tonight. As Steve said, I just have some really basic information about our program, about the proposed injection well. But the real value is the question and answer, I think, from us. So if you just hold your questions till I get through the material. I talk pretty fast when I'm nervous, so we should get through pretty quick. So with that, Steve, you can advance, please. So I'll just, again, the things I want to cover are a brief introduction to our program, but I want to talk a little bit more about produced fluids and production fluids, or brine. I got so many comments about what is this stuff, and so I want to be really clear about what it is. Spend a little time on that. We'll talk about the details of the proposed well and some of the permit requirements, and then at that time we'll open up for questions and answers. So UIC, or Underground Injection Control, that's the branch that I work in for EPA. And as most of you probably know or can assume, our goal is to protect human health and the environment. But even more specifically, our branch that we work in, we're focused, our mission is to protect underground sources of drinking water. And we do that in a few different ways, but mostly through the regulation of injection wells. When I talk about regulation, I really mean a two-step process, both permitting and enforcement of these wells. So in permitting, such as a draft permit as we're here today, we'll talk about really the construction, the operation and monitoring of those wells, and closure requirements. And of course, in regards to enforcement, when I reference enforcement, that of course is inspections and data analysis from the injection. So about produced fluids, so many of you've heard the term brine and salt water, and you're probably sick of it. But I think we can all agree that there's a common element out of whatever is in this fluid is that we don't want it in our drinking water, right? So whether it's an industry term that's calling it brine or a regulatory term, I refer to class 2 fluids. It's things we don't want in our drinking water. But we do know it is mostly salt water or a really heavy, heavy brine, which would be much heavier than seawater. It's very salty. But we know because these fluids are produced from oil and gas producing formations, that they've come in contact with hydrocarbons. So they can contain various amounts of hydrocarbons. Stuff, again, we don't want in our drinking water. And lastly, I want to point out there's a lot of other constituents, sodium, calcium, magnesium, things that are both naturally occurring, or even fluids that could be part of the production process. So I want to be clear about what we're talking about. I apologize if some of those terms are confusing or overused. But we're talking about fluids used or generated in the exploration of oil and gas. So injection wells, you know, I know are not a popular subject, but they do protect underground sources of drinking water and are intended to do so. And they do so in a few different means. But first and foremost, they take fluid and inject it deep away from our drinking water sources. This injection process is really intended to return fluids that were either generated deep underground to the formation which they were produced, or a similar formation which can accept that fluid. Of course, formation. And lastly, these are constructed with multiple layers of steel and concrete. So, again, our purpose is to protect the sources of drinking water. So, I just wanted to briefly mention about our USC program in Michigan and what we regulate. There's a very large, what I call a universe of Class 2 wells. And again, I'm sorry for the regulatory term, but that's the type of well we're talking about. These are saltwater injection wells, or as I commonly is Class 2. There's over 1,200 active Class 2 wells in Michigan that we regulate. And most of those are actually disposal wells. We have more than 60% of that are Class 2, we call them 2D or disposal. The rest are enhanced recovery wells, projects that inject fluid to enhance the recovery of oil. And as you can see from the image there, those red dots, those are disposal wells. A heavy concentration of them is in northern Michigan, and it's generally from the historic production in Michigan, in an interim formation, gas formation. And if I were to put a slide of production wells, oil and gas wells, it would be very similar to this USC. So again, the direct permit number here for the proposed well is called the C4 D4-18. And that again is what we call a saltwater disposal well or a brine disposal well. Again, these are fluids produced from oil and gas production. I want to point out that the Tribal Energy Company could not inject any other fluids generated from other companies. This is proposed as an individual permit. This is not a commercial permit. Only fluids that they produce would be approved for injection. I just wanted to point out one last. Wanted to just point out the formation in which the Toronto is producing from is called the Trenton Black River, and that's what we call primary production. It's conventionally produced wells. So, anytime EPA receives a permit application from a company, we have an obligation to review that and evaluate that application. And we do that in a few different steps, but there's some general information that we're really focused on. And first, that would be the geologic sitting, the well construction, operation practices, and the maintenance and closure of those wells. So I'll get into a little more detail as we go. So this image is not to scale, but this is kind of a good example of what you might see in a typical saltwater injection well. So here we identified in the geologic siting, first the base of the lowest USTW. I've gotten really great comments on this. And part of the reason why this maybe seems different to folks is we have a regulatory requirement where we initially based our review on a quarter-mile AOR, a quarter-mile area review radius. And so the representation here is for the geology or the geologic siting in that quarter-mile AOR. So in this case, based on the drilling and formation record from the Secor B4-18 production well, there is an oil and gas production well on site. The record from the drilling of that identifies the lowest VSTW is the Bablo, sometimes pronounced Boglan. So forgive me if I get that wrong. We'll talk about that more as we get into the Q&A. Got some really good comments. I'm aware of deeper drinking water wells and irrigation wells outside of the area review. Next, I wanted to point out the Salina group, and that's what we've identified as the confining zone. These are essentially non-permeable or protective layers. Various types of rock are in the Salina. We have shales, we have anhydrates, we have a lot of good rocks that provide a good protective layer. And sometimes those layers are called aquicharge, aquicludes. Those are also great for preventing the flow of fluids. And lastly, I just need to point out the Niagaran is the proposed injection zone. So this is a dolomite, which is porous, and we know that it's a popular injection zone for these types of wells. And we know, based on drilling and formation records, that we have more than 400 feet of proposed strata for that injection zone. So what I wanted to try to do here with this slide is try to give you an idea of the construction of the well. I realize that this slide is a little bit busy. It may not be the easiest thing. But if you can imagine if we were to take the proposed construction of this well and slice it right in half, do a cross-section, this is maybe what you would see. So if you can envision multiple layers of casing, or if we can envision pipes within a pipe within a pipe, that is how the well would be constructed. We first constructed with surface casing set to a depth of 306 feet. Now, as the judge was mentioning, we got some great continuous information about deeper drinking water wells, so that's something I'll talk about more too. But the idea here, if you can imagine, is multiple layers again of protection. Every single one of these casings must be cemented to the surface. So starting with the outside, you would have a layer of cement, a steel casing, another layer of cement, and then another steel casing between that, and again, the same case scenario. So that's potentially 6 layers of combined cement and steel casing. Important thing though, is that's not actually where injection takes place through. It's not that casing. Injection takes place through yet another pipe, or what we call tubing, that would be inserted in the center of that well. And the bottom of that pipe would be sealed off with a device called a packer. So if you imagine like a drinking water straw with a device at the end, which is expandable, and it creates a space in between that inside casing called an annulus. So this is just a little closer view of what I'm trying to explain. That annulus space to EPA is very important for a couple of different reasons. One, we require that to be monitored at all times. That annulus space is filled with a corrosive inhibited liquid to the top, and that pressure is monitored. So if this well was to have problems, or any well, what we first experience is changes in that pressure, in that space. And so that's a warning sign to us that something would be wrong, and that we would want to either further investigate or shut down that well immediately. So we do have built-in requirements for monitoring the annulus. And when I talk about that too, that's what we describe as the integrity of the well, or part 1 integrity. It's our first sign that there's any problem. It's really an important part. So about the permit. Well, I know some of you have seen the permit. It's been online for some time, but not the best read. So I wanted to just kind of focus on some main things that are really important to us. The first is the maximum injection pressure limitation set within that. So this well in particular, we determine MIP, or maximum injection pressure, using a calculation that an equation that we use physical components or physical characteristics of the fluid, the depth of the well, and a default fracture gradient to determine that. So in this case, we determined 213 psi would be the maximum injection pressure. In that equation, we build in a safety factor. We add 0.05, essentially 5% safety factor to the weight of the brine, or the weight of the produced fluid. And that's a way for us to build in an extra cushion and make sure that if this well was injecting and it reached that limit, it would not be able to fracture either the injection zone or the confining layer. So very important to us. And as I mentioned, the physical characteristics of that water are very important to us. So we require, first, during the application process, a brine analysis. Number one, we're looking at the specific gravity, how much, or the weight of this fluid, really to calculate those maximum injection pressure limitation. And again, we further require that on an annual basis. We also have reporting requirements, and I'll get into that in a little more detail shortly. But we also have a closure plan. Every proposed well must have an appropriate closure plan, so the company just can't get up and walk away from these things. They must be closed. Historically, orphan wells have been a big problem in the oil and gas industry. And we know that, so there's always a plan that's first approved by us. We know the cement calculations are proposed in construction and the closure, and we approve all those first. Lastly, there's a financial assurance requirement in the permit, meaning that, again, the company, if something happened, they went bankrupt, ran away, whatever it is, the finances are already secured to close the well. In this case, Trendwell has an irrevocable letter of credit and a standby trust agreement with Isabella Bank in the amount of $316,000. And what that means to us is EPA has an agreement to utilize those funds in the case of needing to close that well. That's already established, and that is, again, an important part of the permitting process. So regular reporting. I think we all know no one wants to see any injection well not being monitored. We find that's a key part of the process, both in permitting and enforcement. So there are weekly reporting requirements, and weekly monitoring requirements, and then monthly reporting. So on a weekly basis, the injection pressure would be recorded, flow rates, the annulus pressure, which I mentioned so much, was so important to us, and cumulative injected volumes. All those things were reported on a monthly basis and reviewed by EPA staff. Again, the annulus, that fluid that I mentioned is filled in the annulus space. That's reported to us on a quarterly basis. So even small amounts of fluid changes we're aware of. And again, I mentioned annual and brine analysis are required. And again, we're looking for changes in this fluid, changes that might indicate we need to adjust the permit conditions. But all wells, before they're drilled, have some requirements they have to meet. And the first is a mechanical integrity test. They must pass that before ever receiving authorization to inject the EPA. And what that is another word for it is a standard annulus pressure test. So again, that annulus space that you speak to that's so important to me, that would first have to be pressured up and monitored for leaks before ever receiving authorization to inject the EPA. And those tests are always witnessed either by EPA or our friends at MDEQ. So again, in the interest of keeping this as concise as possible, I've already went into a little more detail than I anticipated. I want to point out that we feel that the construction, the operation, the monitoring, the maintenance, the closure, and the enforcement of these wells is really what protects the drinking water. We feel strongly in all those elements of our program. And I can, again, reiterate that there's no contamination of water anywhere permitted. It's absolutely prohibited. And that's, again, the foundation of our program is to prevent that. And there's significant penalties, both criminally and civil penalties for any of those violations. So I understand you have a lot of questions, and I appreciate the patience going through this. But again, I want to point out that this well has to be, if ever permitted, must maintain that mechanical integrity at all times, or they get shut in. I mean, these are kind of the key aspects of our program. And again, I get really good comments, and I look forward to talking about these other things that I didn't cover on the presentation in more detail. Thank you guys very much.
Maybe 30 seconds on the process, Tim, and maybe I'll walk around.
I thought I was done. I'm sorry. Yeah, so where are we at in this stage? I mentioned a couple times, this is still a draft permit. So we received, again, a permit application. We have an obligation to review that, both for completeness and then technical soundness too. So we made a draft decision. You guys are aware of that. We put the draft decision. I noticed we've had one comment period from December to January, and now we've opened the second comment period, and we're here tonight for a hearing and to receive your comments. So, like as Steve mentioned earlier, the Q&A session that we're about to open, and that dialogue won't be recorded formally, but the second half of our session tonight is where you'll formally enter your comments verbally if you'd like to, and the court reporter will do that. After this time, I'm sorry, the comment period will actually close a week from tonight at midnight. So anything you don't get in tonight, or something you might even think of after tonight, you still have a week. Please feel free to email, fax, send me a letter, however you want to get those questions or comments to me, and we will absolutely review all of those comments. I've already had some really good technical comments that we might not always see, so really interested in addressing those comments.
Okay, so let me walk around, and folks who want to ask him a question, we'll do that. Let me remind you though, if you have some facts you want to share with us, some opinions, comments you want to share, and ensure that EPA responds to them in writing, please make them during the hearing process, which starts at 7:30. So I think I saw a hand here.
Yes, I got a couple of questions.
Sure.
One is fracking waste is notoriously has high levels of radon gas and radon waste in it. You use the term mostly salt water. Who monitors what's injected into the wells?
Who monitors like the
What type of waste is it?
What type of so that's one of the subjects that I was trying to be pretty clear about. So we know there's more than just salt water, right? And you just mentioned hydraulic fracturing, a really key point. And we know in those what we call stimulation projects or hydraulic fracturing, there's other constituents. What I wanted to point out is first this well is injecting fluid from primary production, and so this is not Trimble is not hydraulically fracturing their wells. But the point is they could, right? So there can be more. So EPA has a regulatory definition of the fluids which are permitted, and that's what I meant by Class 2 fluids. So those fluids would be acceptable for injection into this well. On an annual basis, we require a brine analysis or chemical composition, but it's not. We're not looking for components of hydraulic fracturing. That's not a requirement in this case. Those fluids would be considered a Class 2 fluid, and those would be permitted for injection.
So what's a Class 1 fluid as compared to a Class 2 fluid?
Well, Class 1 is different. You could have a Class 1 wastewater from industrial processes. That's a common Class 1 fluid. We also have Class 1 hazardous waste wells. So those wells could be all sorts of, you name it.
So this is fracking waste. Class 2 is wet fracking waste.
Fluids from hydraulic fracturing operations would be considered under Class 2, yes.
So what I'm saying is that they have a high level of radon in these wastes from fracking operations, and when they inject them, some of them are over 100 picocuries of levels, and for an average basement, you're safe with less than 4 picocuries. So, you know, we're talking a huge radioactive problem that could end up in somebody's well if this leaks with the karst formations we have in this area. So if there is an accident, who remediates this? Is it LLC? Do they have insurance? This company?
Great question. So that's account of what happens if something were to happen. First and foremost, the operator or the company is always primarily responsible. Now, what happens if they're gone? They head out of town and someone can't find them. Well, in that case, we have both state and EPA programs that are designed for remediation. We have very good authorities under both federal and state statutes to allow us to do that. For example, our friends at MEQ have the Part 201 rules, which allow that. EPA, we have under Safe Drinking Water Act, we have 1431 emergency powers. And so there's a lot of things, resources out there, even our remediation programs in EPA, other remediation programs. So this isn't...
And how would they remediate something like that if they destroyed everyone's drinking water?
Well, first and foremost, I think the idea is to protect the drinking water. And again, it's to do that through the construction, operation, and maintenance, and enforcement of these permits. So that's key to us, and that's our mission, again, to protect that from ever happening. That's why we have the multiple layers of casing, the multiple layers of cement, the system to monitor the well, the annual space, these indicators. And so it's designed really as a multiple phase concept. You know, it's not just a hole in the ground anymore where someone's putting fluid in.
Hasn't Congress been cutting funding for the EPA over the last decade or so?
You know, I think that's beyond probably the scope of this permit action, or what we really, you know, are trying to cover tonight in this discussion.
Okay, you know, we may be able to loop back to folks later, time permitting, but I want to do my best to give all who want to ask a question.
Good question, thank
say
you.
something. This gentleman here, and then I'll go out to the periphery.
The previous 1,200 wells that you've shown, how many has failed?
Failed as in leaked or contaminated water? None of them.
None. Is the well made of steel?
That's correct. So those casings are steel, and then they're in between those cases. They're cemented to the surface.
And how long are they projected to last?
How long are they? Well, we don't permit Class 2 for a time period. Our first sign is always that monitoring that annulus. So anytime there's changes in that, there's maybe signs to do some rework or repairs. It's a very early indication for us, and I feel very strongly that we're good at monitoring that.
Well, the reason I ask is you've got a lot of corrosion between steel and concrete, and the other chemicals being dropped in there, so you will have corrosion at some point.
Sure. So again, the idea is the outside layers are really protective layers, the steel and concrete, and then the actual injection is going to come through what we call tubing. It's steel pipe. It can also be fiberglass. It can be other materials. So that is what is actually in contact with the injected fluids. The rest of the casings are not. They're cemented to the surface. So in between all of those casings, there should be no way for fluid to come in contact with those steel surfaces, like you said.
And how old is the oldest well that was flowing?
You know, that's a really good question, and I don't want to guess on that for you. That'd be something that I could look into later. But we do have some very old wells from the early 1900s that were what I mentioned were rule authorized wells. So they were drilled before EPA had an injection control program, before we were regulating them. And they were required at some point to upgrade their wells, and we do track and monitor those. They're subject to the same monitoring requirements, but I can look into that more if you would like.
I have a two-part question for you. Does the EPA, before they issue the injection permit, actually make a site visit? And had we, the community, not wrote and asked for this meeting, would you have issued it without a site meeting? Did you actually go there, see what the surrounding is, what our community looks like?
Sure, great question. So I was here in September of last year, and I did a site visit personally. I met with a Trumbo representative, Jeff Wazak, who may have signed you in, was with me. We have done a huge increase in enforcement in the last 18 months. So I've spent a tremendous amount of time in the field. The closest injection well really from Road are next door in Lenawee. And so being nearby, having a permit application, absolutely, I wanted to do a site visit. And so, yes, I did visit that facility. If you guys have seen it, it's a newer facility. They have their tanks painted. So for us, that was a facility that was already completely constructed. And so it's probably a better looking facility, being brand new. The second part of your question, the interest that the community exhibited certainly is motivating to come up. So we are regulatory required based on significant interest to hold a public hearing, and most certainly I think we call this significant. We got a lot of comments, a lot of really great comments, and a lot of thought, I think, is going into this. So again, this is part of our permitting process. We value this interaction, absolutely. So these are great questions, and I hope this, and I'm not the best presenter, a little nervous talking, but I hope some of the presentation is starting to fill in some of these gaps. And again, I apologize that the info isn't as transparent in the fact sheets and some of the early documentation that you got, but we're trying tonight, and hopefully can clarify some things.
Let me just add before I go to the next person, that even if there's a well that where only one person comments, we will respond to that. You might not have a hearing because it doesn't meet the threshold of significant public interest, but we respond to all comments that we receive on that.
My questions have to do with the permit. The DEQ permit application shows a depth of 1,200 feet. The EPA proposed permit shows 765 to 1,200. Which is correct?
I'm sorry, the DEQ permit?
It says that depth is 1,200 feet.
Right, the total proposed depth of the well is 1,200 feet. At a certain point, Trendwell revised their application, and they sent us a second submittal. And so the information that I presented tonight is the most accurate and is consistent with NDQ. So yeah, you're right, they did change it.
Along that lines, the permit application shows 10,000 barrels per day. Trendwell states they've amended their application to 3,500 barrels per day. Has the permit application been formally amended?
Okay, great question. So yes, Tremolo sent both the MDQ and EPA a letter amending that proposed injection volume. And I think when they initially applied, they were going conservative approach. The volume to us as an agency is not a permit requirement. It is of interest to us, but they do not have a volume limitation. The way volume is limited is based on our maximum injection pressure. So you can only get so much fluid down a hole at a certain time. The pressure will limit the volume that they can put in. And so we feel that is a very strong permit condition. The MIP, we feel it's very conservative. One, because we use conservative values, but two, we also add a safety factor. when calculating that. And so it's really the pressure that limits the volume on a daily basis.
And my next question is, does the permit allow disposal of produced brine from outside Summerfield Township, Monroe County, or the state of Michigan?
Very good question. So again, what I was trying to mention earlier is it's not a commercial permit, but it is limited to the company's brine. So it's fluids that Trendwell has produced. It doesn't have to be their own wells right here in Summerfield. If they have a production well in the county next door, the permit would allow for that. But it has to be their own fluids. It can't be another company. It can't be hauling in waste from somebody else. So thank you.
Injecting the brine in the first place, is it more economical for the company? Does it have to do with pressure gradients to replace what they're taking out? Is there any other way to dispose of it besides injecting it on site?
Great, thank you. Excellent question. So, sure, I think it's been suggested recently, there may be other ways of treating fluid or disposing it in other manners. We, as an agency and as a program, the Underground Injection Control Program, have an obligation regulatorily to review any application that's submitted to us. So Trendwell, they asked for a permit for an injection well, a Class 2 saltwater disposal well. So we have an obligation to review that for, again, its completeness and if it's technically sound, and if it meets our federal requirements. And so economics of this isn't something that's a requirement for us to evaluate. There's an alternative. Again, the basis of our program is to make sure that these wells do not contaminate underground sources of drinking water. And so that's what we're focused on, and not alternatives. They certainly, as a company, are welcome to explore those other options. But our focus is to make sure all proposed wells are safe.
Well, this is a karst area, and as you know, when they talk about Michigan Basin, they're not just talking about all the Great Lakes, because when the first glaciers came through, they dug out the lakes, made a big pile of dirt here in the middle, and then as the next glaciers came over, you've got one bowl inside of another. We have several layers of that bowl coming up in Monroe County, and that's where your water flows. So is the depth of this well going to, where's that water likely to come up in this Michigan Basin? Lake Erie, 100 miles from here. We did some testing of wells in Monroe County through a subgroup of the Soil and Conservation Service in the late 90s and the early 2000s until, of course, we ran out of money and there was very little interest. And we already had some salinization of certain wells in the area, and of course we have sulfur. And we already have some bad water problems here. But when you talk about fixing something, the amount of money you mentioned doesn't sound like enough to run water lines for anybody who might be affected, and it might be somebody affected not even in this county.
Sure. Let me stop you there, because I think I'm hearing 3 questions there, and before I get...
There's a lot of questions.
Right,
too,
absolutely.
because we have a very unique geological area here in Monroe County. And we've already had a lot of problems with our water. And so it is a very disconcerting thing. When we ran some water tests here, we couldn't even use salt because it was too toxic to use for any kind of water testing. We had to use something that was very inert and very expensive. But, even our healthcare system, we're not going to have the money to take care of people who might end up with some problems caused by contamination in their water. And closing a well is not going to fix a water table that's been destroyed 100 miles away.
Sure. So, thank you. Great points. First, the karst one. That's a great point and a popular one that I heard from a lot of commenters during the first comment period and again during the second. So the most, I guess, important part related to cars would be first during the construction of the well. And the concern with karst regions would be, while cementing those casings, could you lose circulation? Could you hit a karst area, and would you encounter problems constructing the well and cementing it to the surface? So the karst areas that we've identified are more than 3 miles away from the proposed site. So the records that we do currently have are site-specific. We have the drilling and formation records from the production well that is on the C4D4-18 site. And that's our first most solid and accurate record. We also have, from Trendwell, 2D seismic reflective surveys within the area of review. So that data from Trendwell indicates that we should not have those problems if this well was drilled. Still, a very important thing to consider. We don't expect that. If that was to be encountered, that's an issue that would have to be addressed during the construction. If they can't meet the construction requirement standards of the federal government, then they're never going to get the authorization from us. And I kind of may have skipped over that. So I mentioned we do mechanical integrity tests first, or a standard ambulance pressure test. What I failed to mention was after a well is drilled, all of those records, the drilling records, cementing tickets, all of that must be submitted to EPA so that we know the wells are cemented to the surface. So again, there is a check and a balance for the karst. The second thing you mentioned was where I think will this brine go, or what body is it going to connect to, or where is it going to empty out? We wouldn't permit an injection well that we thought would have any connection with surface water. And again, that's the idea. The idea is to prevent it from contaminating surface water, so to inject deeply. And again, the ways that we prevent that connection is through first a proper geologic siting. And so in this case, we've identified confining layers in the confining zone called, and they named that the salina group. And so there's a number of layers that are great for confining that. They're impermeable, and really that's kind of the first step. Is this site a good site for an injection well geologically? So we think there's some very good confining layers there. Secondly, we know there are not surface conduits that the fluid could leave the injection zone, like a poorly plugged or constructed well nearby. We've reviewed all of the plugging plugging records, construction records, and all of that data, and determined that there is not a corrective action needed in this case. And I think the last topic that you mentioned was cost if something did go wrong, if there was a remediation cost. And while I did mention the trust agreement that Trendwell has with Isabella Bank, that's designed to cover the cost of closing. You're right, that's not designed to cover drinking water for everybody. Well, what I did try to point out is that both the state of Michigan and the US EPA, we do have statutes that give us authority to remediate those cases. They give us emergency action authority in those cases. We have an entire division dedicated to just remediation of sites that there no longer is a company representative or a company to tie to that. The company is always first held responsible. If somehow we couldn't track them down, if they headed out of town, we have the authority both at the state and federal level to protect the drinking water or remediate.
I have a question for you. Can you honestly tell me that they have not used the C4 well already?
For injection?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's not constructed. If they were to construct it, it would be a violation, and it would be a hefty violation at that.
The reason I'm asking you this is because when they said that the C4 well went dry, trucks started coming around 3 times a day.
Okay,
Doing something down there.
sure.
Obviously, they're not getting oil out. It's dry. This was going on January, February, March, around the clock. So
Okay.
I'm just wondering if they already used it or what's going on down there.
So, I mentioned earlier, I did do a site visit at the facility last September. The well was not constructed at that time. The only thing on site was the production well. You may have seen the oil horses, the tank batteries, the oil treater. There was no injection well at that time, so.
So you're saying it's not even constructed yet?
Right, it's not constructed, and they couldn't construct. That would definitely get EPA's attention if they were to construct without a permit, I can tell you that.
Okay.
That would probably be one of the most serious violations of the city.
That's correct. Yeah, that unauthorized injection would be very serious, if not the most serious violation.
I want to point out, I think your graph up there showing 200 feet at the lowest drinkable water level is very misleading. A mile and a quarter away, 10 years ago, I drove my well 380 feet to get sustainable drinking water. My neighbor had to go 40 feet lower than I did. That's more than double of what you're showing up.
Sure.
Second off, you said the shale is 3 miles away. According to the EPA website, if a spill would happen, they say underwater groundwater moves 10 to 15 miles a day. You're saying shale is 3 miles away. That gives you a 6-hour window if something happens. Third off, what is going to be, everybody's worried about the water pollution. What is going to be the air pollution? I mean, the smell of the oil in the air now around the area is almost unbearable. What's going to change when they start pumping something else in there?
Okay.
So, before you answer, two things I want to mention. So I heard some comments in there. So please do make those again during the hearing, starting in about 35 minutes. And I heard the concerns about air, and Tim might speak to that, but I wanted to indicate that we have folks from the state of Michigan here. Tim and I work in the underground injection program, which is a sliver of EPA, and we deal with these wells that we're talking about. Within our program, we do not address kind of ancillary activities that are associated with bringing the brine on site, otherwise managing the site. But other parts of EPA may, and parts of DEP may. So with that, Tim, what would you do?
Yeah, first, I'm sorry, I tried to, first, when I was on that slide, try to give you an idea that I wasn't aware. I know there's some deeper drinking water wells, and so some of that is new information, and that certainly is all information we're going to review, okay? And I know I identified the bottom below, and that's because of the site-specific conditions. Within the quarter-mile AOR, that's what I identified. That's also based on the drilling record from the site. So I certainly understand. I know I've seen there's an irrigation well that someone pointed out for me, and I've used Michigan's well logic tool to look at some of the other wells, and I know there's some that are 465 feet, I think, for one irrigation. So that is a very important thing to us, and certainly will be considered heavily as we move in considering comments. I'm sorry, I know you mentioned air quality, and Steve mentioned that is kind of a cross-program thing. We do collaborate with our other programs, air and our air monitoring, air enforcement, and so those are things that certainly we can get other programs' attention to if there are issues. They do have air requirements. The state does have requirements for them, and I think I'm sorry. What was the middle question? Or
The shale formations are 3 miles away, and according to the EPA's website, underwater groundwater moves 10 to 15 miles a day.
so
So if there's a leak, you're talking 6 hours before it's contaminating wells.
what I was trying to say, I think that was this in response to the karst questions. Okay, karst. So I know there's karst in the region. We know that it's been identified 3 or 4 miles away. We feel very strongly and confidently about the layers of rock above the injection zone to confine the fluid. The Salina group, as I mentioned, is a really good group of rocks for doing that. There's some very impermeable layers. There's a great anhydrite layer that prohibits fluid flow. There's the sea shale layer that is fantastic. as a person who has to review these applications, that is a preferred confining zone. I can tell you that. That's what I guess like to see most. I'm very confident in that from preventing upward flow from the injection fluid. So the movement of groundwater above that zone, whether it's fast or slow, should never ever be affected. If something is getting to the groundwater, that's the absolute worst case scenario. And we think all these kind of layer cake approaches, a multifaceted approach to protecting the underground sources of drinking water is what really is the strength of the program. It's not just the geology, it's also the construction, it's also the operation, it's also EPA enforcing these permits. And I take great pride in being active and being in the field doing that. So.
In the Cars area, do you guys have any records on the cars that's here? Number one, and number two, is there any other Cars areas where you have injection?
Good question.
Is there any studies on the cars we have here in this area?
Good question. There is a lot of information out there. I'm familiar with a few different sources. One, Treadwell has submitted some information that they had on the Carson region. There's also a lot of information on the internet, and I'm not aware of wells.
Is there any studies laid in this area how deep our cars are? Because I know I've been studying on computer, there's places on this planet, on the Earth, that's over a mile plus deep. We're up to 5,000 deep cars.
So I'm not familiar with those, but I
I don't
mean,
have any studies actually on the cars.
in this region.
In this area.
In this region, I have information that Treadwell has submitted. I have publications, journal articles, that sort of thing. But I'd be very interested if you have information that you'd like to share with us. I'd certainly interested.
And then also a while back, when there was a CO at one of the meetings here in the township, he expressed that they already had, just say now, 16 at least injection wells now.
Treadwell?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have, I'm just curious if they could truck this product from one of their other locations, because then it all came out at the same night, they had over 450 wells.
Sure. Okay.
So they go real bad.
So that's a good point. So Treadwell does own other injection wells. Why does it have to go here, right? Well, as the agency regulating these, we did receive an application, and I know that probably sounds redundant, but we have a regulatory requirement to review those applications. So I can't go back to Treadwell and I can't say, you already got, X amount. That's why I'm not going to review this. I'm required to review their application for completeness, for technical soundness, and that's why we're here.
Thank you. I think you said something about Treadwell, anywhere on one of their wells it could come from.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of limited yourself, you say, as went over Lenawee County, what other states do you know? Can it come from another state, another country?
I don't know that Treadwell has
You don't
wells
know.
in Ohio, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, or Ohio or anywhere, you don't know.
No, I don't
Other
know.
than this state.
Right, other than Michigan. So I'm
So
not.
you have the option that it could come this way, anywhere from any place.
There isn't a limitation. The limitation is it must be Treadwell, the company's. You're correct.
Because I guess my next question is, you get most of your information from Treadwell, or on your data. Isn't that kind of like giving the bank, the keys to the crook to the bank?
Well,
Okay, isn't that?
And Tim may have something to add. I appreciate that perspective. I've been working in EPA for 23 years, and I've worked in the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And all federal environmental laws are written this way, that a person seeking permission provides information to us. But here's the key, okay? The person, the application has to be submitted by a senior corporate official, And there's specific certification language which says, I have personally examined this information or have inquired with the folks who collected it, and I certify under penalty of perjury that this information is true, accurate, and complete. So EPA takes that on great faith, and I think justifiably so, because the penalties for submitting false information are criminal penalties. And so we kind of have to, we can't necessarily independently verify every fact submitted to us in the permit application, but we do rely to a great extent, and we prosecute people for falsifying information on their applications. So, it permeates all federal environmental laws.
If I can kind of just respond or answer that real briefly. I think like Steve said, we first receive an application. We have very clear requirements in permit application. So of course the operator first has to gather that information to submit to us. This is by no means all taken for word. I certainly consider myself a professional. I am an environmentalist. I absolutely not only fact check, but I request additional information, and in many cases go beyond to make sure. I think I mentioned 2D seismic reflexive surveys. That's not a requirement. That's something I asked the company for, and at least one information request, and working with the company where I needed information, where I felt there was maybe a hole in the data that I have that authority to go back and ask them for more. So thank you. But yeah, I certainly pride myself on my work ethic. Thank you.
I still got one. Okay, the professionalism, reading charts is great. I have no doubt been educated that way. But they're drawing one hole in one little place. The vast area that they're going to push this might not know what we got, and we don't want to. Unless you can give us more information on areas. Guarantee it.
A man named Mario Salazar, who worked for 25 years for the EPA in their underground injection program, made the following statement, quote, in 10 to 100 years, we are going to find out that most of our groundwater is polluted by these injection wells. A lot of people are going to get sick, and a lot of people may die. My question is, if the local populace is 100% against a well like this, does that make any difference in your technical decision?
No.
So that's a very good question. So
May I just interrupt? All our questions are good. Would you stop telling us?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Apologize. Sure. So I could have gone a little further, and I should have, in explaining this chart. I have a responsibility to evaluate the permit for technical soundness and to meet the federal requirements. Second part of that is your comments here. We consider each and every one of these comments. Some are more technical than others, but they are all considered, right? At any point, if EPA makes a decision to permit this well or to deny it, you have the ability to appeal that to our environmental appeals board. So I think it's important to understand whether a permit meets the federal requirements or not. You do have a means to appeal.
But I hear you saying that if they meet all the requirements, you're going to approve it. Do you take into account the fact that no one here wants it? Does our voice count, or are you just looking at the technical construction of the well in concrete and steel?
Well, we do have a responsibility. We are required to make those decisions that meet our requirements. So yes, if they met all of our requirements, the idea would be that they would be issued a final permit. The second part of that is the consideration of the comments. And so I think some of what I've heard, especially even this week leading up, are some really good, both suggestions, some very well thought out things that we may be able to consider further. And maybe, I think it seems like there's this rigid process, but permitting can be flexible. And when a permit requires a modification, there's the means to do so. So if something needs to be more protective, we're certainly are considering that.
You answered my question. If it passes the technical permits, but none of us want it, will it still be approved?
So the question is asking us to speculate at this time.
And past history. Things.
There have been, well, I don't want to speculate myself either, so I'm not going to go there. What I will add to what Tim has added is, the framework that we operate under and the critical backdrop for all of this is the statute. It's the authority given to EPA by Congress that gives us certain rights, but it also confines those rights in some respects. So in the final analysis, we do carefully consider the comments, and where we have the capacity to make adjustments in response to those comments, we will do that on occasion, perhaps often. But in the final analysis, the final decision is appealable by any party who participated in the process, including the permit applicant. And EPA would ultimately have to defend its decision with respect to any party that chooses to appeal it. And in order to defend it, we have to defend it on a technical basis and on a legal basis. So that's kind of the critical backdrop. As an agency, we're often criticized for trying to do more than people think we should. And we're criticized by some who think we don't do enough. So what we're kind of stuck in a place where it's difficult to make everybody happy in all circumstances. But we have to honor the statutory authority and stick within it in the final analysis. It absolutely matters. And we will, by us being here tonight, we're going to take your comments here in a little while. We're going to carefully look at those. A variety of folks in our office are going to be looking at those comments. There's going to be scientific review of the answers. There's going to be legal review of the answers. There's going to be management review of the answers. So the input does matter. So I hope I can give you that impression that the input does matter very much.
Thank you. I'm curious, where is Treadwell headquartered, and are they a subsidiary, and if so, for who?
I'm not aware that they're a subsidiary. I believe that Rockford, Michigan.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. You mentioned 1,200 wells in Michigan. How can you supposed to check on those weekly and monthly? How many people do that? I mean, how could you?
Right. It's a big population of these wells. So you can't cover them all. But again,
Why do you have the thing that they're checked weekly and monthly?
well, that's just it. So they are monitored on a weekly basis by the companies. They're required to certify.
I have another question.
Don't worry about that.
The $316,000, I think they covered that a little bit. That's not very much for a company to be responsible for thousands of people, maybe get sick or anything else. One other thing is Keith and Gene Seabart are here, and they had an article in the paper that said concentrated CO2 can be used in this fracking activity. In some states, it is brought from another state via pipelines. In concentration, CO2 can kill you instantly if you breathe it in concentration. It removes the O2 from your lungs in seconds. we have read where tracking water, CO2 mixture came back out of the well and killed all the animal life on the surface. And one other question, they want to get rid of this wastewater. What are they doing with it now? Where is it?
Well, they're not injecting it on site, that's for
I
sure.
said, where is it? It's coming out, they have to get rid of it.
So there, as one gentleman mentioned, there's I think, he mentioned that the had 14 or some other injection wells. There are also commercial facilities, which will take other companies, they're permitted differently. They're permitted as a commercial. But I definitely hear your perspective about enforcement, but it is a permit requirement for the wells to be monitored, and that data is a responsibility of every one of our permits. So I'm in the field as much as I can. I'm training others as much as I can. We also have contractors that help with inspections and test witnessing. And we also have our partners at the state who are constantly in the field as well. So,
Can you explain anything about the CO2? Are they going to be using that?
no, so I'm not familiar with that, and I'm not familiar with the companies at any time to that. I'm sorry.
That should have been used. Okay, thank you.
Steve?
Let me mention one other thing. So this, the idea, and it's actually the model, they're here again across all federal environmental laws where the regulated party self-monitors and reports that information to EPA. A couple things to add on top of that statement, because I hear it's not very popular. When they send that monitoring information into us, again, they have to certify it through perjury that it is true, accurate, and complete. So that's one layer of compliance, and then we look at that. And then on top of that, we have inspectors who go out and independently collect information. So our system doesn't stop at the self-monitoring done by a company, but we also have inspections that we do ourselves.
CO2 is used to enhance oil recovery, primarily from abandoned wells that they thought they couldn't get any more out of. But anyway, I had the opportunity to talk to a gentleman who did geophysical testing in the right-of-way, you know, with the geophones and the fiber optic cable and all that. And we had quite a conversation many, many months ago, and I said, gee, I wonder if they start drilling for oil or gas out here, what would ever happen? I wonder if we'll ever have fracking, and if we did, what would happen to the frack fluid, because 40% of it returns to the surface. And he said, we'll just truck it to Ohio, they'll take anything. Ohio's not like that anymore. Ohio is strengthening the regulations. Another thing that could have been done, instead of this proposal, another thing would have been to clean it up and recycle it, put it in lakes and rivers. That's not really a great option. Another thing that they can do is recycle it for use in other hydraulic fracturing operations. I don't know all of the dollar signs involved as far as what is most profitable for the oil company, but the fact is they've come to you with this. And I need to get my facts straight because there was a lot to absorb from your presentation, and I want to make sure, when you went through the list of what we would expect to find in the fracking fluid that would be injected into the disposal wells, I jotted down a few things. I couldn't write fast enough to get them all before the slide changed. Sodium, calcium, magnesium, barium, iron. My question is that a complete list, or was that just an example of some of the things that are included? Because I'm well aware of the chemicals, the number of chemicals in frac fluid. I'm not aware of what they all are because of the Energy Act of 2005, the Dick Cheney deal where proprietary formulas were allowable. So the oil and gas companies don't have to tell you necessarily everything that's in it. I think we know Wall, excuse me, I might get some of these wrong, benzene, not a chemist, not really skilled in some of those areas or knowledgeable. But I want to know, was that a complete list, or was that just a few things that seemed to carry less concern for the public? And do you know more? Could you put more in that slide as far as what's really in the stuff?
I would have needed some more slides. So I tried to get a general idea that this is more than just brine or saltwater. That's a common term we use in this industry, brine, saltwater. So I was trying to paint that there can be more constituents in this. I use the word hydrocarbons, and so that's a broad term that covers a long list of things. And so yes, there are certainly other things that could be in this fluid. And our program is limited by our regulations. So these fluids are all defined as a Class 2 fluid. And so we have to treat them that way. We do have specific requirements, and I've gone through those, you know, the construction, operation and maintenance, closures, etc. Those are specific to these types of fluid. But you're right, I was in no way able to cover everything that is approvable on that list. Oh, and you mentioned, the CO2 you mentioned, enhanced oil recovery. I didn't make the connection when the other gentleman said it, but I was not familiar with trend well using that practice. But yes, I'm aware of CO2 use enhanced oil recovery.
Sorry.
I know you're not in charge of it, but what about the type of tanker that they're going to be bringing all of this over our roads? Who's going to take care of our roads? Who's going to clean the roads in the winter? Who's going to pay for that? There's many other things, you know, that's not even mentioned here, and I know that it's not under your terms. It's going on. There's questions here that still just running around. I mean.
Sure, so you're right, there are a lot of things that aren't specifically just covered under our program. Our friends at the state do cover a lot of those. You mentioned the road traffic, so there's brine tankers hauling brine. The site for the proposed well is on the well pad of their current, one of their current oil producing wells, the C4D4-18. And so conceptually, any brine produced from that well, those wells nearby, are directly piped into the storage tanks on site, and then in the oil and gas, or I'm sorry, the oil separated from water, that brine would then be injected on site. That's what's proposed.
Well, I know we took Canadian trash, and then one of their trash vehicles got in a wreck, and then they tried to sue Michigan. I mean, is this going to be the same type of scenario?
Well, you know, again, it's a little bit outside of the scope of our program. I don't have a regulatory requirement for the truck traffic portion.
I'll go ahead, Tim. I wanted to ask you about all the information that's given to you is certified under penalty of perjury. Part of that was that they told you that the acreage wall in this area was 200 feet. And to the best of their knowledge, that was an actual statement, but they weren't, I never got a letter from Trendwell asking me how deep my well was. How are they gathering this information? They're speculating who's actually going to go through and check this. You're finding out this the day of the hearing or the week before the hearing. I mean, that hearing, it wouldn't have happened had we not spoke up. I have a lot of doubts about the process of gathering this information and the monitoring of it done by Trendwell. That's unacceptable. We have an agency to protect the environment. We shouldn't have the fox guarding the hen house.
Sure. So the USTW itself, or the underground source of drinking water, identified on that slide as the Boblo with a base of 200 feet. You're absolutely right. There's other tools to find out the depth of drinking water wells in the area. The first part of that, the answer is that was within a quarter-mile area review, so a radius of a quarter-mile. That info was based on the drilling record from on site. So when they drilled the oil well, I have the drilling and formation record, and the base of the bog well was 200 feet. Within that area, using State of Michigan's well logic tool, I found other wells, but the deepest one I think was 171 feet, if I remember correctly. I understand short distances outside of that area review, we have some other data that shows deeper wells. So that's absolutely something we're considering and expanding in that search.
I appreciate that. It's just quite alarming that that wouldn't be something that would be looked into before we got this far.
Yeah, I understand that for us, the quarter mile is in the regulations. So we start with that, and it's the thought is that that is conservative, and so you can always be more conservative, right? You can look outside of that, and some of that information that we're looking at now is valuable. And so if you're a foot outside that AOR and you got a deeper well, that boundary doesn't mean anything. You know, we'll absolutely consider that the base of the underground source of drinking water could be deeper, and maybe the construction could be adjusted accordingly to be more protective. So thank you, absolutely. I'm doing my best to. That's very important.
We haven't moved back toward the back of the room the whole night, so. And so we've got about what looks like about 7 minutes left. So let's try to get as many folks with the questions out as we can in those 7 minutes. And equally, if not more important, part of the night is when we start the hearing and we actually take the comments for the record and for responses.
First, did you just say a quarter mile is conservative?
Quarter mile is the regulatory requirement, and that conceptually, the idea is that is conservative.
You're talking a quarter mile away from where the well is, right?
That's correct.
That doesn't even seem close to conservative. As far as the sampling goes, you were talking about, I did water sampling analysis for many years in the Navy, and then for a sawmill, and for Ford Motor Company now for quite a while. And so you don't get more aware than me as far as who's filling the paperwork out, who's writing the results. The guy who is going to be doing those for this company is going to be pressured from people above. You know, if something is a little bit out of spec, and I'm not sure exactly how they, you know, what they're checking for, or if it's something that could change day to day, how often they do it. You know, if it's out of spec today, just a little bit, don't circle it red, you know, make it like it's supposed to. When you guys come in, how often do you do your sample to check on the company? You know, is there somebody who's checking the paperwork, you know, reviewing the paperwork for the last weekly, monthly samples for the last quarter, last 6 months, looking for anything out of spec? And I would assume everything, if they do find anything out of spec, it had to be reported. But if something, say some things go out of spec, but if it's a minor and it can fluctuate a little bit, that's not a big deal. At what point is it a big enough deal where the well's got to be shut down, or could they just wait for it to go, come back into spec, wait a certain amount of time, shoot a bunch of pure water in there to dilute it and bring stuff back into spec? At what point does it actually get shut down? And how often are you guys actually doing physical samples, not just reviewing their paperwork? And even on your physical samples, if stuff is close or a little bit out of spec, does that mean a shutdown, or does that mean some corrective actions could be taken?
So I can clarify a little bit. It sounded like you were mostly talking about sampling and what's in the fluid. I think that's what you were basing on. What we're focused on is the integrity of the well, the construction of the well, and how it is operated and monitored. So the fluid, what's in the fluid, is not sampled by us. It is sampled by the company on a minimum of an annual basis, and that is part because we need to know the weight of that fluid. It ties into our maximum injection pressure. That's a permit condition. Every time we do receive data, that data is reviewed by our staff. I mentioned a couple key points of that data. One was annual pressures. That's a key thing that we monitor. So changes in that, fluctuations in that are kind of warning signs for us, and that is always a red flag. We have people that look at those reports every day, refer them to someone else. If there's an issue that is something that we correct immediately. If a well, I mentioned integrity of a well. When that time was, all these wells have to pass a mechanical integrity test. That means a pressure test on that annulus, because that's our warning sign.
Hold on a second. I'm not just referring to sampling of what they're putting in the well. I mean, do you have sample points in surrounding areas in your conservative quarter mile to check for ground contamination, whether it's the well leaked or whether stuff is coming back up in the well water in the surrounding area? Are they doing samples away from the well to make sure there's no contamination either leaking out or coming back up? That's the sampling I'm referring to. Do they have to do those kind of samples?
EPA, we don't require that, but
that seems way more important than what they're actually putting down the well. I mean, we're all worried about if it's going to come up and contaminate our well water. Not so much what the hell they're putting down there if they've got a little bit more toluene today than they did yesterday.
Yeah, again, I think the idea behind the construction and the geologic siting of the well is that there'd be no way for that communication with your groundwater. That's the whole basis, the concept is put the fluid deep away from the groundwater drinking source and have protective layers that won't allow upward movement. And then again, the construction of the well and monitoring it. So I know MDEQ does have their own sampling requirements, but to be clear, EPA, we do not. I mentioned a couple times, there's a lot of phases to permitting that are kind of dual responsibility. And so there's some things we don't cover, but the state does.
So the only way to discover if they're, I realize you keep saying that it's by design, they're going deep enough based on the different layers of impermeable rocks and all that stuff around here that it shouldn't come back up.
Right.
So you're not expecting it to. So the only way you're going to find out if it did happen is if people start reporting their wells start tasting salty, or people start dropping dead or getting sick from their well water?
Well, again, there's some pretty clear methods that we use to make sure that doesn't happen. And again, it's that annulus space is really, it's our earliest warning sign. We know you have multiple protective layers of both steel and concrete, but what's going on inside the well through that injection tubing? If there's changes in that pressure, that's the early sign. The idea is to have a warning so that something like that never does happen. We also know the other wells constructed in the area, we know we've evaluated their construction so that there wouldn't be another conduit or something, another pathway for the fluid to leave the injection.
So I do see a couple more hands, and I think I want to offer an apology so that we can do two things. One is invite anyone who's standing to come and have a seat, because there are a number of open seats here if you want to. And then secondly, get started with our hearing so that we can start to take the comments and concerns for the record, building toward a written response from EPA. So I know we have a great turnout, and we have a lot of folks who had questions. I tried to get into as many of them as I could, but I think it's important now for the process in general that we go through transition to that hearing part of the night. So anyone who's standing and wants to sit down, why don't you grab an open chair, and we can get started with that.
But it's pretty
So as I mentioned,
amazing.
at 5 o'clock or shortly thereafter, my name is Steve Jan. I'm the chief of the Underground Injection Control Branch at EPA Region 5 in Chicago. Thank you for coming out tonight. Obviously an outstanding turnout. Welcome to our hearing on the draft permit for the Trendwell Energy Corporation proposed injection well. It's called the C4D418 SWD. With me tonight are three environmental scientists who work for me. One of them you've met and had the last hour and a half with, and that's Tim Elkins. Also, Jeff Blazak is here. You might have met Jeff when you were coming on in, and Lily Simmons. Jeff, Tim, and Lily all work for me. I also have Pete Cassell, who works in our Office of Public Affairs. What I've asked Pete to do is to help us manage the time to make sure that every person who asked to make a statement when they signed in gets the chance to do that. So Pete's going to be my timekeeper. Some folks may find that the available time is kind of short. And I want to apologize for that, but say two things. One is this is our second public comment period on this draft permit. We had one straddling kind of December and January, and this one continues for another week after tonight. So if after tonight something new occurs to you, you're more than welcome and invited to send those comments in to us. If in the time that Pete's going to give you, you don't get the chance to say everything you want to say, please do send an email, send a letter to Tim, send a fax to Tim, and get the balance of your thoughts into him. So we're here to listen to your comments on the draft permit for this proposed injection well. Trendwell wants the well so it can inject brine fluids brought to the surface from oil and gas production. And EPA proposes to issue this permit under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the companion federal regulations for underground injection control. This program is designed to protect underground sources of drinking water by permitting only those wells which meet federal technical requirements and the law. The program is also designed to ensure public participation in the permit process. And we invite the public to comment on every draft permit, and we hold hearings when, as is the case tonight, there's significant public interest. We announced this hearing in the Dundee Independent and the Monroe News on April 16th. We also mailed a notice to landowners within a quarter mile of the proposed injection well, as well as those who submitted comments during the first comment period and other interested parties. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we had an initial public comment period that started on December 19th and went to January 21st. A public hearing provides an opportunity for people to formally and officially make EPA aware of their views on this draft permit. Oral statements will be recorded word for word by our court reporter, but this is not like a trial or anything where there's cross-examination or anything like that. This is your chance, along with the balance of the comment period, to tell EPA whether you feel the terms of the permit are consistent with the proposed, with the underground injection control requirements in the Safe Drinking Water Act. And also provide your opinion about whether the facts, as EPA has presented them, are accurate. So our role going forward tonight is to listen and to record your comments. We will not respond tonight, but instead we will prepare a response to comments later, which will be in writing and will be made available to those who comment during the comment period for tonight. And critically important to that is the review of those comments by Tim, his immediate supervisor, by me, by my supervisor, by our attorneys, and Tim will pull in other geologists and engineers in our group as necessary to evaluate the comments and determine how EPA will respond to that. So after considering all those comments, we will make our final decision, which will be one of three things. It will be to issue the permit as drafted. Second, it could be to issue the permit with modifications. Or third, it could be to deny the permit. If you commented during the comment period or participate in this hearing tonight, you would have the right to appeal that final decision, whatever it may be, to a group called the Environmental Appeals Board, which is part of EPA, is like administrative appeals stuff is what the lawyers call it. And decisions by the Environmental Appeals Board can themselves be appealed to federal court. If you want to make a statement, please be sure that you provide your complete information to Jeff or Lily out at the registration table so that we can correctly enter your name into the record. Let's see, if you choose not to make a statement but want to get a copy of the final decision, including the response to comments, then please make sure that you've provided your name and contact information to Jeff or Lily. So we will maintain copies of the transcript from the hearing as well as the written comments submitted in our office. And those documents will become part of kind of the full file, the full administrative record that Tim has compiled for this permit application. The comment period ends at midnight on the 27th of May. So you have that additional week to send in comments. Jeff and Lily have been kind of keeping tally of how many folks want to speak, and based on that and our available time, we've got about 3 minutes for each person to speak. And then beyond that, there's another week to send your comments in to us. So with that, we are going to call you, folks who comment as well. And He has placed the microphone right there on the stand. So Pete, would you like the first person up?
Sure. Before I start, actually, on your way in, you might want to check your pockets. Someone dropped some money. We have it at the registration desk. If you tell them how much it was, they'll be able to return it to you. So just wanted to get that out there before I horribly butcher every single person in here's names. So I calculated out that we have about 3 minutes each. And we're going to go ahead and call Mayor John Chandler the microphone first. He has 3 minutes. Supervisor.
Good evening. Welcome to Petersburg. Thanks for coming. My name is John Chandler. I'm a supervisor of Summerfield Township. And I'll try to keep it 3 minutes here, but my board meeting is about 3 hours. My job responsibilities are to oversee everyday operations of the township and protecting health and safety of the residents. It's a top priority. The proposed injection well threatens the health and safety of our residents, our agriculture, and our property values. As a former employee of British Petroleum Oil Company for over 20 years, I can tell you that I'm no stranger to disposal wells. There is no such thing as a risk-free wastewater injection well. When you consider the karst geology of Monroe County, the presence of sinkholes nearby that are believed to be direct conduits to Lake Erie, the abandoned oil and gas wells, water wells, from 50 to 1,500 feet deep, many within 1 to 2 miles from the proposed site. A county drain which feeds the Raisin River is located less than 75 feet from the site, which makes us a dual threat to the area. The permit application is riddled with faulty specifications. We'll prove that now. The U.S. General Accounting Office has documented dozens of cases of drinking water contamination from the operation of deep wells injecting oil and gas waste. Reports from various karst committees and geological studies all warn of the dangers of injecting waste in this area. I was going to read to you a report from 1970. You may have this report, but it specifically warns oil and gas not to inject waste in this area. I'll present a hard copy to you guys. What we have here is a recipe for disaster and an accident ready to happen. The proposal provides zero benefits, only high risk and high liability to our residents. I have thoroughly researched this proposal and have consulted with scientists, environmental specialists, engineers, geologists who are here, and experts on injection well construction. They all warn of extreme high risk of contaminating our water. I am personally convinced that this wastewater injection proposal goes forward. It will not be a matter of if, but a matter of when. It will cause complete havoc to this area. Summerfield Township holds its tax-paying residents and business owners to a higher standard by making it illegal to dispose waste of all kinds in this fashion. We expect Tremwell Energy to comply with our ordinances as well.
Okay. Your time has elapsed.
I can't.
In order for everyone on the list to be able to speak, we have to limit everyone's time to 3 minutes. So
I have 2 of my minutes, 3 no more.
Come on, man, he's got all the information more than we do. Come on, let him talk.
We'll just read off, hey, we'll read off.
If you could let us know when we get to you that you've given us his minutes, we're gonna go on a trust system here. So.
Really?
Let me just say this.
Trust, right? Well, you're not going to trust the people. Yeah, thank you.
Wait. Then what I'm hearing is now.
Speak up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to introduce Amy Ryder, and there'll be 2 others from our staff that'll present things worth listening to. So we can talk later. Come to one of our meetings. We can talk more. Thank you very much.
Recognized by the U.S. Geological Survey, EPA, and other scientific organizations. According to the United States Geological Survey, and I quote, karst terrain is characterized by springs, caves, sinkholes, and a unique hydrogeology that results in aquifers that are highly productive but extremely vulnerable to contamination, end of quote. EPA Report 600-X-89050 states, quote, waste disposal facilities should not be located within karst terrain unless one is willing to risk sacrificing the use of at least part of the subjective karst aquifer as a source of potable water. This is a high risk, almost a certainty. Trendwell Energy has activity in 9 states in addition to Michigan. The proposed permit does not restrict Trendwell to produced brine from Summerfield Township, Monroe County, or even the state of Michigan. Trendwell currently has 12 wells in Monroe County, 8 of which are in Summerfield Township. U.S. Geological Survey has determined that groundwater in Monroe County flows in at least 4 directions. Monroe County has artesian and flowing wells. There are irrigation wells in the surrounding area of the proposed injection well at least 465 feet. Fractures in the limestone and dolomite bedrock have been known to allow liquids to travel as much as 10 to 15 miles. And most importantly, Summerfield Township is in a known karst area. The EPA should deny a permit for an injection well in Summerfield Township. If a permit is issued, several items should be included, such as Class 1 standards for cement bond law, a step rate test to determine what the fracture pressure actually is, monitor how much and at what pressure fluid is being injected. The proposed permit does not specify a significant bond in the event of potable water wells are contaminated. The bond should be a cash bond in the event Trendwell Energy ceases to exist. The cost of municipal water system is $300,000 to $500,000 per mile, and Summerfield Township has over 105 miles of road, plus over 1,098 household hookups that would be required. A significant cash bond of at least $62 million is reasonable.
All right.
Third, the proposed permit is for production wells owned or operated by Trendwell, but does not define ownership or operation. Is 1% ownership for 1 day allow you to use the disposal well and be considered ownership or operation? Ownership and operation should be defined. What is salt water? The permit should specifically specify produced brine only. Thank you, and thanks to Tim for being an excellent speaker.
Next we have Dave Kubisky.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Most of you know me. I'm the township engineer here in Summerfield. I'm also the township engineer for Whiteford Township. I'm here to fill in the holes of what you didn't hear. There's nothing the EPA said that is incorrect. Well, there's a couple of things, but we'll get into that. First off, I want to say that Trendwell is asking to put a well down 800 feet, and they're going to be producing about 1,200, I'm going to change this from barrels to gallons so everybody understands me. They're going to be producing about 1,260 gallons a day. They're requesting a well that'll accept 147,000 gallons a day. Well, let's put that in perspective. That's 300 trucks a day coming down the road. EPA is right. They have no say in the trucks. The trucks are your problem. Our problem. The type 2 well that's being injected is only get tested once a year. Now, if it only gets tested once a year, what's happening the other 364 days, particularly with 147,000 gallons that's going in? We don't know. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is that the confining layer. Now, the confining layer, they've already mentioned that the confining layer, they are comfortable with the confining layer. What we have here is a couple of illustrations. This explains how a confining layer works. Now, the confining layer from Treadwell's logs themselves specifically say that they're in the Salina group. Now, the Salina group is known as dirty bedrock. Dirty bedrock means there's fissures, there's problems, you can go in and out of it. Anybody knows that you can drill a well in the back of your house right now and not get a karst and go next door and hit it. Guaranteed. You cannot assume that by putting one well in and only looking at the other wells that are only 1,320 feet away that you're not in karst. That doesn't work that way. We all know that. We've all lived here. We know what karst is all about. We've got the big sink 3 miles away. We've got Ottawa Lake that's 5 miles away, which is a lake in the springtime and they plant corn in the summer. The point of this is where I have the yellow here is actually the dirty bedrock, the Salina, and then they go into the Niagara group. The Niagara group is also considered the best type of system or zone in order to stop the water from coming through, or stop anything from coming through. If they're in the Utica shell or that type of thing, but those are 2,300 feet down. That's why this 800 feet is very questionable to even consider. The other thing that they don't tell you, because they don't have to, is when you inject into a well, there's a certain pressure you put. They're asking for 230 if I recall. Not very much in an injection well. But more important that you have to understand, how do you determine that? In their permit itself, they said they calculated it. They didn't test it, they calculated it. Now if they calculated it, and we all know that how pretty much our cars falls apart when you put it under pressure, that's going to break open into the system. So the bigger problem with that is that has to be tested. It really truly has to be tested. You just cannot calculate it and say, let's cross our fingers and hope it works. Because if that does occur, there's many farmers in here. There's many farmers not only in Whiteford and Milan, but also in Dundee and Ida and everybody else that's in this formation, that if that salt water gets in there and those irrigation pumps turn on, they have just, thousands and thousands of farmland has just been salted. And they're not going to know it until like, something's wrong, everything's dying out there. That's above and beyond the problem that we're going to have with our drinking water, above and beyond that. We have they could potentially, if it gets through, that layer could destroy the farming community here as we know it. Again, we're only talking about the well itself. We're not talking about drilling for oil. The oil well, he's right, he's talking about being in the Trent Formation, which is substantially further down. But they don't want to put the injection well further down because then it's going to cross-contaminate their well, their oil. So it doesn't make any sense to drill a well just so they can just do a big circle. That's why they're at 800 feet. Makes sense on their part. We also have, and I'm being redundant here a little bit, but we do have a substantial amount of irrigation wells that are in the area. When I say in the area, it's within 3 miles. 465 feet, and they're going to be at 800 feet. We're not that far away from each other when it comes to distance. One of the things that I also found out is that Summerfield Township, we only get the exact verbiage on this, the Michigan DEQ, in their summary of the hydraulic conditions by county in the state of Michigan, discussed the fluid transmissivity value of Summerfield Township. In other words, how does water flow through Summerfield Township? They put it at 1,000 to 1,300 feet per day in the Salina group. Now, Salina group is just above the Niagara group that they're going to be putting it into, which means if they get through that layer, 1,300 feet a day, that's traveling across our county. But it goes more than just across our county. Because this area right here, I'll get you in a minute. This area right here that's just above the Salina is called the Bass Island Group. What do we know about Bass Island? We know it's in the middle of Lake Erie. It's the same formation. This formation, through tremendous amount of information that's available from the USGS as well as from the DEQ, pretty much states that, yeah, it's pretty much the same formation. As a matter of fact, there was a study done, and I will send it to you, that specifically states that this water actually goes from here, and they have blue holes in Lake Erie where they believe that the water's coming out, from Summerfield, Whiteford, this area here. But anybody that's farming here already knows that. I mean, you really do know that. The other concern that we have is the fact that they're only drilling this thing 80 feet away from the Burton Drain, which goes right into the River Raisin. Why is it that groups, the DEQ, are asking farmers to have a 100-foot strip here to save our environment, but you can drill a well 80 feet away? The logic, I don't get it. The other thing that most people in Whiteford know, as well as in Summerfield in some areas, is that we're a well-first area. Well-first area means that most of the water underneath this is under the direct influence of surface water. It's called water under the direct influence. That's what DEQ calls it. As a matter of fact, if you want to build a house here, the first thing they say is you better put a well in and find out if it's contaminated or not first. This is the same water we're talking about, the exact same water. So the point being is that if we're in a well-first area, and it goes all the way down to 465 feet, and then they add salt to it, great. If that breaks, that's great. That confinement layer is so critical to us that Treadwell, and if EPA approves this, are putting their name on the line saying it'll never happen, but we know how things happen. We know. I guess I'm going to summarize this. One more thing here, and I'd like to present that to the EPA here as well. This is a map, I'm blinded. This is a map by the USGS that shows the Michigan source water assessment, groundwater in karst areas. And they have Monroe County highlighted extremely well. More particularly, they even show the karst areas where we're standing right here. We know we're in karst areas. Everybody in this room knows in karst area. We just have to explain to EPA that in fact this is a karst area. It's well documented, it's well defined, both in USGS, DEQ, and DNR, as well as other studies that have been done in Michigan State. We even have a karst committee in Monroe County. How many other counties have a karst committee? That's how bad our karst situation is here. And that's how important this is, that this does not get into our drinking water, period. I'm going to summarize this by really saying that the high risk associated with the consideration of this well is not really worth the trade-off that we're going to get out of this. And frankly, we're not going to get anything, but the trade-off is just horrible. I think that the clean water is a precious commodity, and we really shouldn't be playing Russian roulette with it. Thank you.
If